Okay, we are going live.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be with you here all this afternoon for our environmental stewardship, nature in your classroom. We are going to be going live in 5, in 4, in 3. So excited to explore environmental stewardship in 2 and in 1. Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine. So excited to be here with all of you today, and I'm joined by my colleague Raya. Say hello, Raya.
Hi, everybody. My name is Raya, and Jasmine and I are both educators with Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. I'm not sure if you can see my shirt there, but as the TRCA, when I look at our logo, I feel like, well, you know, that word conservation really jumps out at me. That's the most important part of our name. So that idea of conservation, it kind of means like to save and protect. What we're trying to protect and save is the environment. And we want to make sure everybody appreciates that idea and also plays a role in protecting the environment, because we only have the one planet, right? And we all need to play a role in maintaining its health. So today is all about that. But before we get into that, I wanted to mention a couple of things. If you are watching with your teacher, so maybe your teacher is screen sharing and you have a question, you can, in your classroom chat, you can put the question in there and your teacher can relay it to us, perhaps, if they're able to get on YouTube this way. If you are watching straight on YouTube, then you can put the question in the chat as well directly. We do ask, though, please be responsible with the chat, right? Just like you would be respectful in a classroom. If we're having too much goofing off, then it becomes really difficult for our helpers on the back end to make sure that we get the questions that you have. So please no goofing off on the chat, but absolutely you can ask questions. If you want to make some comments that are respectful and appropriate, that's great. A second thing is, if you have, regarding questions, if we don't get to answering some of them during, we will have a question period at the end. And so we can answer a lot of questions at the very end. If you happen to have the worksheet, then that's great. If you don't, that's okay. You can just enjoy. But with the worksheet, if you would like to request it even afterwards, teachers, there's a link coming up in the chat shortly, and you can request a worksheet there. And some of the things we're talking about today, there are some links to those ways of doing stewardship that are in the worksheet as well. So what we're talking about today, environmental stewardship. Let's get right into it. Jasmine, come on back. And I wanted to ask you, Jasmine, when you hear the words environmental stewardship, what does that make you think of?
That's a great question, Raya. So I know environmental stewardship means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When I hear it, what I think of immediately is, okay, this is a responsibility. And this can be a personal responsibility or a shared responsibility between everyone to make that decision to care for the environment and to personally choose to help the environment. That's what I think of when I hear environmental stewardship, and this idea of kind of taking care of something that doesn't belong to us, but taking care of it because we know it's the right thing to do. Raya, what do you think of when you hear environmental stewardship?
Yeah, everything you said makes a lot of sense to me. And I also kind of think of this idea that as humans, the environment doesn't belong to us. You sort of alluded to that as well. It's not like we own it, but we are a part of it. We are a part of the natural world. And I sort of take that responsibility seriously, that I'm a part of this bigger system. And I want to make sure that the way that I'm existing in this environmental system, this natural system, isn't one that's actually causing the system to break down. So like my daily decisions about how much waste I produce, how much food, or what types of food I consume, if it's processed or not, like all these kinds of things, it's all a mindset that I've adopted. And some of the things I've actively decided to do as stewardship in my life have now become habits in my life. So like buying things in reusable containers, like that's just become a habit for me. Today I took out my garbage. It was about this big that I put in the garbage bin. It's a garbage day on my street. So anyway, environmental stewardship to me is a bit of a mindset as well, like philosophy of life.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. And now, why do we think it's important? Why is it important to perform environmental stewardship and to take care of the environment? What do you think?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we are part of this system, and we don't want the system to break down. And when I say system, I mean like the system of of nature, basically. If nature gets destroyed as a whole, then I mean, humans will for sure suffer. But like, there is so much wildlife that has full on rights to exist on this planet, and we as humans are making it really hard for them to exist on this planet by destroying habitats and things like that. So I think it's really important because we want to make sure that all wildlife has spaces to exist, and that we have enough of a natural world that can support us humans too for years and years to come. Do you have any thoughts on what?
That's exactly what I think as well. I think that, you know, maybe we want to take care of the environment because we enjoy it and we love it. And I know for one, I love going for bike rides and going for hikes, and I love being in a space that I know is healthy and taken care of. But it's not just about us and humans. It's also about every other living being that we share this space with, and they all deserve a chance to live in a healthy environment as well. So we've talked about what it is and why it's important. What we're going to be sharing with all of you today are some of our ideas for how you can actually perform environmental stewardship in your own life. So thanks so much, Raya. I'm going to go ahead and share a bit of my presentation now about environmental stewardship. And one really great way to perform environmental stewardship is through something called citizen science. So some of you may have heard this word before, some of you may not be so familiar with it. Essentially, what citizen science is when we think about scientific research, we can picture kind of this large database that has been kind of all of this research that's been collected by scientists throughout the world over many, many years. And citizen science is an opportunity for people like you or me or Raya to kind of get involved in this research and contribute to this database. So there's only so many scientists in the world, and they only have so many hours in a day. But by getting involved as citizens or as a community, we can help devote our time and energy to support some of these research initiatives, which I think is amazing. And one really great way to do this is through something called iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is essentially this incredible global database. And what you do is you record an observation, and that can be of any kind of piece of wildlife. So a plant, an insect, maybe a mushroom or an animal. And by recording that observation, even if it's on the side of the road or in your backyard, and then sharing that and uploading it to other scientists across the world or other people across the world, all of these observations can contribute to biodiversity science and can be used for further kind of research projects and further initiatives. And I'll just show you, this is a kind of standard sighting on iNaturalist. So we can see someone has spotted a common garter snake here in Toronto. They've uploaded it and they've suggested their identification, and then other folks in this community have gotten involved. And they've said, yes, that is a common garter snake. They've identified it and added to this identification. And what that means is that now this is a research grade identification. So anyone who's, maybe there's a scientist who's studying snake populations and distribution across the city of Toronto. Sightings like this are a really great way to kind of help that research happen and to help contribute to these projects. The iNaturalist website can be a little hard to use, in my opinion, and what I prefer to use is actually this amazing app they've created, which is called Seek. So Seek is an app that you can download on your phone or on your tablet or device. And what it allows you to do is essentially take photos of living things and then upload that, and you can kind of track your own observations. You can also share that to iNaturalist further. But what I like the most about Seek is kind of the way it encourages me to get outside and interact with my environment. So I'll share this quick video with you here. And this is on my phone. So you can see I'm opening up the Seek app. And I just want to show you a bit about how this app works. So you can see I'm in Toronto, and you can see all of these different species that have been observed here in Toronto. And you can see I'm actually logged into iNaturalist through this app. So the Seek app is directly connected to iNaturalist in this way to kind of contribute to citizen science. Now, a really cool thing about Seek is they actually have these badges. So every time you go and observe a species, that's recorded, and then you can actually get kind of accomplishments and achievements for observing these species. So I haven't observed that many fungi or mushrooms, but I have observed a lot of our plants. So I have a gold plant badge. I've observed over 20 plants, which is so exciting. And I love seeing these little achievements pop up. It almost becomes a game. And it really encourages me to get outside. And by having this encouragement and learning about the species around me, I feel this deeper connection to the environment and to the outdoor spaces, even kind of in my own backyard or down my street. So you can see these are all the different observations that I've accumulated over the years. So it has this kind of log of all the cool things I've spotted. I've spotted a few birds, a few insects here as well when they sit still enough for me to take a photo, and a few fungi as well, a few different mushrooms, and only one mammal so far. So there's still a lot of organisms and animals that I haven't yet taken a photo of. So I'm still kind of challenged to do a little bit more. And then finally, they have these challenges. So they release these all the time, and they're basically missions where you have to observe different kind of animals or plants. And once you observe all the ones in the list, then you get a badge for completing that challenge. That's another really fun way to kind of encourage yourself to get outside. And I'll show you this video as well. So like I mentioned, you can actually post to my Naturalist right from the app. So this was just on my street, and I found this tree and I wanted to learn more about it. So I tried to identify it. You can see I'm identifying it there, and it picked it up as a Norway spruce. So I took a photo of it, and then I'm going to view the species, and kind of, you can look at some of the photos of it, and you can learn a little bit more about it as well. And then you can actually post it directly to iNaturalist. So what this means is that this observation you've made using Seek is now being uploaded to iNaturalist and can now be used by other folks who are interested in Norway spruces in Toronto, or even researchers or scientists who want to learn about the different tree species that we have here. And I'll just show you this video as well. So one thing I really like about Seek is that you can learn about the health of your local green spaces in your local parks. So you can see I'm in a park just down the street from me. It's an urban space, and I actually found garlic mustard. We're going to talk about garlic mustard a little later, but it is not a native species. It's not super healthy for our environment. It actually can damage our environment. So I found that and I said, whoa, okay, there are some invasive species here and some species that are not so good. But then later, I actually found the garlic mustard an adult flowering version of the garlic mustard. So I was able to identify both kind of the young plant and the old plant. So you can see it's really taken over in this space. But then I went a little further, and I was really excited to find what was actually a native species. So right here, I found cutleaf coneflower. And this is a really incredible native wildflower. So by using Seek and learning more about some of the plants or animals that are living in your space, you can learn about how healthy your local parks are, and maybe if there's something you can do to help them be even more healthy. And I'll just show this video quickly because it's pretty fun. And sometimes using Seek is a lot easier with plants than mammals. So I found this squirrel and I was so excited to try to ID it. I took a photo, but I couldn't get the actual species, and then it ran away. So usually when I'm using Seek, I'm using it with plants because it's a lot easier to just take a picture and they're not going anywhere. But I'll mention that when we're using Seek, it's always best to kind of double check your observations. So Seek is amazing. It's a really easy way to start learning about what's living around you, but you always want to be double checking these observations. And so using iNaturalist and using Seek are great ways to interact with your environment and the spaces around you. And like Raya mentioned, she's actually in the environment right now. She's in a really incredible space. So Raya, I see you're doing some bird watching. I would love to hear more about the ecosystem that you're in right now. Maybe you can share some of that with us.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you so much for sharing about Speak and iNaturalist. I was doing some birding because I wanted to document what birds I'm seeing and submit them to a citizen science database too. So I was trying to use the opportunity. All right. I didn't tell you where I was earlier. I'm going to share with you the location in the GTA in Toronto where I am. So I am actually at Tommy Thompson Park, which is also known as the Leslie Street Spit. It's down on the waterfront. So if you were to come, I don't know if you know Leslie Street in the East End, if you went all the way down to the very, very bottom of Leslie, the address here is pretty much 1 Leslie Street, and then you kept going, it's a peninsula that goes out into Lake Ontario about 5 kilometers, and it's become this amazing wilderness space in Toronto. So right behind me, we have some beautiful cattails that are growing. This is a native species. We don't see the kind of cattail seed head yet that looks like a bit of a veggie dog on a stick or something, but we can see these cattail plants that are really healthy right here. We have a lot of aquatic vegetation, so plants that are growing in the water. The cattails are emergent vegetation growing out of the water. And I'm seeing dragonflies and damselflies. I spotted a great blue heron and in an egret out here. So there's a lot of wildlife that makes use of this space. And I'm actually going to stop talking for a moment and let you just listen and see what you can hear in this space. Now maybe you're hearing the red-winged blackbirds. I'm hearing a song sparrow twittering away. Sounds like there are some trumpeter swans just over kind of another berm there. So with having all these wonderful native species in this wilderness space, we can support so much wildlife. And it actually has taken a lot of work. Nature has done a lot of it on its own, but we at the TRC have done so much work to try to encourage this habitat to be really healthy. One of the biggest challenges we've had with this is that like if you were here about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, you would have seen another plant here as well called Phragmites that was really starting to encroach on this wetland. This is a pretty new wetland that we built over the course of many years. And Phragmites is a tall plant, looks a bit like wheat. Actually, Jasmine, can you play that video of Phragmites from another trail in this park? And I'm gonna share what's happening in the video here. So here is a different spot in Tommy Thompson Park. And I took this video last year only, where the Phragmites is this plant that is all we're seeing. Like if you look around, do you see anything else growing here other than that one plant? It's a little choppy right now, but that's okay. We're getting the idea. And I certainly don't. I see a few trees in the background, but really this plant, Phragmites, has taken over the space. That means we don't have as much biodiversity. If we don't have as much biodiversity in plants, we have less biodiversity in animal species, and the whole ecosystem starts to fall apart. Now, as I was walking, I was actually thinking to myself, goodness, one of the ways that invasive species can get through, is that it can actually transfer on my very own feet. So if I'm walking from one trail, one park to another, there we go, then we could be carrying those seeds in our treads without even realizing it and accidentally transporting an invasive species to another spot. So being an environmental steward could be as easy as like checking that you're not carrying seeds with you when you go from one park to another. Now with Phragmites, it can travel in a number of different ways. So we humans transport invasive species a lot of the time, but if we look at the next picture, and my phone might be having issues right now because of the heat, so it's a little frozen, Jasmine, but we can see that the seed heads on Phragmites can blow in the wind, blowing those seeds all over the place, and it grows by roots. So all these roots can actually, they're pretty aggressive. They can grow and pop up through gravel and through all kinds of substrate, like a gravel path. It's ridiculous. So this is a very aggressive invasive species. Now, Phragmites is something, it's all across Toronto. It is a bit of a headache. It's in High Park, it's in ravines, it's in ditches, but there are other invasive species that might be closer to your actual neighborhood, like right on your street. So Jasmine, if you can share more information about those ones, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Raya. Yeah, so Phragmites is a really big problem, especially in some of our more wetland ecosystems or areas where there's more water. They really can take over in those spaces. But I want to share some plants, some invasive plant species that can be more of a problem maybe in your backyard or on the side of your street or even in your local kind of parks or forests. And one of those is this one. So we can see it in these two pictures, seemingly innocent, seems like it's not taking over or causing too many problems. And this is actually dog strangling vine. So this is what it looks like here. It has these alternate or opposite leaves and kind of these long oval shapes. And it has these little seed pods. And you can see in the winter, those seed pods crack open. And what dog strangling does is it grows and grows and spreads really, really fast. And you can see here it's actually twirling up, climbing up around this light post. And that's what it will do to shrubs or trees or other plants even. It can grow and kind of wind around. It's basically this vine that can spread and spread and spread. And the problem with that, like Raya was saying, is that when dog strangling vine takes over, what we don't see is biodiversity. Instead, we see one species that is kind of monopolizing the space and taking over everything. And what that means, unfortunately, is that dog strangling vine does not support our local ecosystems. It's not a great food source for a lot of our animals, does not provide the resources they need. So usually you'll see a patch of dog strangling vine and you'll rarely see a single insect or butterfly or another animal in there. So it takes over. It can even damage below ground as well. It can change kind of the soil composition. It's a lot harder for native plants to take root and to grow. And what we're left is just this patch of plants that aren't helping anyone. And they're just kind of there and they're growing and growing. So dog strangling vine is one invasive plant that we deal with here in Toronto and that you are likely to see even in your backyard or in your schoolyard as well. It might be growing there. And another one is one that I mentioned earlier, which is garlic mustard. So the way we can identify garlic mustard is that it has these spiky leaves and these clusters of white flowers on the top. And you can see on the right here, there's a patch of garlic mustard there. There's another one here. And I bet if we came back and took this photo in maybe 2 years, if we didn't do anything, this entire space would be covered by garlic mustard. So unlike dog strangling vine, it doesn't, it's not a vine, so it doesn't kind of curl around and grow around other species. It shoots up, but it spreads really, really quickly and really easily. And just like dog strangling vine, it does not contribute to our ecosystem, and it really harms the biodiversity of a space. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to quiz your identification knowledge. So we've talked about 3 invasive plant species so far. Phragmites, and I'll do a little fresher. That was the one that grows really, really tall in wetlands, light brown. It kind of looks like wheat. We talked about dog strangling vine, which is that vine that has those alternate kind of oval, smooth leaves. And then we also talked about garlic mustard, which has these spiky green leaves and clusters of white flowers at the very top. What we're going to be asking all of you is to try to practice your identification skills and see which plant is in the photo that I'm about to show you. And if you think it's none of the above, then you would say D. So you can either write in your classroom chat if your teacher is screen sharing, or directly in our YouTube chat if you're joining via YouTube. And what you're going to write is either A, B, C, or D, depending on which species you think this plant is. So I'm going to go ahead and share a photo of this plant in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Okay, what do you think? So this is one we just talked about. It's really damaging to our ecosystems. I'm going to give you a few seconds to guess. And if you guessed B, then you are correct. This is dog strangling vine. And look at it kind of growing those smooth oval leaves, and look at how much it's taken over in the space. Okay, we're going to do a few more. So for our next one, same thing, A, B, C, or D. I'm going to show you the photo in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. So this one might be a little harder to see. I do see some spiky leaves and some white flowers, so that we can use our identification skills to kind of look at these characteristics of the plant and get a sense for what plant it might be. And if you guessed C, you are correct. This is garlic mustard. Good job. Now for our next one, this one's a little trickier. Again, our 4 options. I'm going to show you the photo in 3, 2, 1. There we go. So do you think this is Phragmites, dog strangling vine, garlic mustard, or none of the above? I'm going to give you a few seconds to guess. And the correct answer is actually D, none of the above. So in this photo, we can actually see a picture of poison ivy. That's a plant you may have heard of before. It can give humans pretty bad rashes, but it is actually not an invasive species. It is a native species that does contribute to our ecosystem. So it's important to remember that just because maybe we don't like a plant, that doesn't mean it's invasive. The invasive quality has to do with it coming from somewhere else and really, really taking over and damaging the health of our ecosystems and the biodiversity that we have. We're going to do one last one, and our options are the same. I'm going to show you the photo in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. What do you think? I'm going to give you a few seconds to guess. And if you chose A, that is the correct answer. Congratulations. This is Phragmites. So if you got most of them correct, congratulations. If you didn't, that's okay. Identifying these plants is really hard, and it's something that I know I'm still learning every day, and most of my colleagues and my friends are as well. What we want to talk about really quickly is actually how to remove dog strangling vine and garlic mustard. These are invasive species and they're not great. And if you have some in your backyard or in your personal space, removing them is a great way to help out that local ecosystem. And I would love to hear from Raya. I know she knows a lot about how to remove these species. So Raya, could you talk us through how to do that? That would be great.
Absolutely. I just saw a beaver over there swimming. This wildlife is so amazing in this park with such a great collection of plants. Yeah, so in removing invasive species, some invasive species are trickier than others, but dog strangling vine and garlic mustard, well, dog strangling vine is actually pretty tricky, but in both cases, your goal really is to get the entire plant, especially the parts of the plant that are involved with reproduction. So removing the roots is really key. If you can dig around, that's helpful. With garlic mustard, sometimes you can just kind of pull and get a whole lot of the root there. With dog strangling vine, sometimes you have to dig around more to really get as much of the root as possible. And when you're pulling these invasive species, then it might take going back to the same area for a few years to make sure that you get them all. And if that's in a yard, then hopefully that's easy enough to go and just deal with this patch and make sure that they all are gone. Now, when it comes to disposing of them, what would happen if you put like the seed heads or the flowers that can turn into seed even after it's pulled, or the roots into a composter? Well, if that gets taken away by the city and then distributed to people who live in the city as compost for their gardens, they might actually see invasive species popping up. So we want to make sure we're not spreading the invasive species accidentally. The roots and the seed heads, anything that can reproduce on the plant, needs to go in the garbage. Unfortunately, we don't want to fill our landfills, but it does need to go in the garbage. And then you could throw the whole plant in there, but if the stem and leaves aren't going to reproduce, those could go in the composter or just be dried out in the sun and really baked for a while until they're no longer a threat at all. Now, when you're removing invasive species, you might have this open patch, and you really want to make sure that you've got native species, if you can. I mean, if you don't, just pull them anyway. But if you can, get some native species that you can replace into that space so that they can flourish and thrive, and the invasive species won't continue to take over. So I'm going to show you some examples. Oops. These plants were actually grown by students as part of our native plants program in their classroom. So they started them in the winter, late winter, early spring as seeds, and they have been growing now at home in teachers' homes generally when we're teaching remotely. And we have this beautiful wild bergamot that was essentially grown by a class, and it has such a lovely smell. We've got black-eyed Susan that has a really lovely yellow flower grown by students, and butterfly milkweed, which you might have heard is really great for monarch butterflies, grown by students. Look at these roots, they're just coming out of the bottom. This wants to get planted in the ground. So the idea with these plants is that if you see them at home, or these ones that the students grew in their classrooms, they can actually be planted into restoration sites like this one. So we have more healthy native plant species that can try to create a really robust ecosystem. Now, these are wildflowers, and I can actually show you. There's one, put these down. There is one just on the other side of this trail I'd love to share with you. It is flowering right now. So some of them flower later in the year and some flower earlier. And hopefully I won't lose reception coming down this low, but this one looks to me like it's hairy beard tongue. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Hairy beard tongue. It's got a really long flower, so pollinators have to really get in there in order to pollinate that flower and get the nectar and food. But in addition to wild flowers, you might have seen behind me, we have some plants here that have root collars around them. These white, not root collars, rather trunk collars. So these white pieces of plastic that are around the trunk, these are shrubs and trees. And so by putting these protectors around them, that keeps animals who really like young plants from actually destroying the plant right away. Once the trees and shrubs are more established, then they can offer more for wildlife and they can actually deal with that kind of injury. Now, I'm not going to go right into that space because right now I am on a trail, and a part of being a steward is environmental steward is making sure that we're not impacting the environment in a negative way or trying to minimize our impact. And if I was to go off trail, well, I'm kind of going into the habitat, compressing the soil, and perhaps making it less healthy for wildlife. But what I would like to show you is another spot. Oh, I don't know if you saw that monarch butterfly just fly past. So down the trail here, there are some other shrub species. Shrubs are just fantastic. We'll talk about why in a sec. And this area in front of me now, in front of us, was planted a number of years ago. Some of these shrubs have started growing on their own, but a lot of them initially were planted here to kind of start this habitat off, give it a good start. And one of them is willow. There's actually a few different willow species. So this here is a willow shrub plant, related to the willow tree, a little bit different. And this one here, my friends, this is called dogwood. Can you hear that sound? Check it out, check it out, check it out, check it out. It's a bird called a killdeer. So this dogwood plant, it has red branches. It's called red osier dogwood. It's a native species. And look at that. Last year, it looks like maybe a bird had actually thought this is a great shelter and nested here. We have in this park a bird called a yellow warbler, and they like to nest in dogwood shrubs. They have really, really tiny nests like the one I showed you, and they will nest in dogwood. Now there's one more shrub. Oh, looks like we have a shrub in the rose family here. We actually do plant a native wild rose. I don't know if that's the one, but that is super cool. I'm hearing frogs in the wetland. And as we go along this path, we're seeing that there are some slightly taller shrubs here. We've got some trees there as well. And some of these taller shrubs can offer even more to wildlife. So where willow doesn't necessarily produce berries that wildlife would eat, this one here, oh, my phone, hi, is having a mind of its own. When it gets hot, sometimes it doesn't know what to do. So right here, maybe you've seen this on the side of the highway or in different parks. This is called sumac. It is beautiful. I've seen it in people's yards too. And these turn into dark red berries that so many bird species absolutely love. Here are some as well. I wonder if these are remnants from last year. So many birds will eat these berries, and these shrubs are then not only providing shelter options for birds to nest in, but food for the birds to eat as well. And ladies and gentlemen, if you were interested in if you have a yard, I don't have a yard, but if you have a yard, you could plant shrubs in that yard. And we have a little video coming up to describe how to plant them so that they'll survive well. And there are so many different shrub options like serviceberry and hackberry. The one that's being planted in this video is gray dogwood. And it's a great way to attract wildlife to your yard and to increase the habitat health really locally.
Absolutely. So shrubs are a really great way, as Raya just mentioned, to improve our local habitats and to provide these resources and shelter for our local wildlife. And I want to talk about a few other ways to provide habitat directly to some of our wildlife here in Toronto. One of those ways is by building structures for different wildlife. And one type of animal that we can build structures for are bees. So we know a lot of bees live in hives, but or in colonies. There are actually a lot of bees in Toronto. We have incredible diversity between bees who are solitary. And these bees will nest in either stems or tunnels or dark holes. So you can see in this photo, there are some kind of dead stems that were left here in the winter, and these are perfect nesting spaces for some of our native solitary bees. What we can actually do is we can kind of mimic these spaces by creating bee condos that look like this. So they still have these dark, long tunnels that provide the space that bees need, some of our solitary bees need, in order to nest. And I want to highlight one of our solitary bees in particular that I think is so cool, and that is the leafcutter bee. So the leafcutter bee looks like this, and what it will actually do is kind of chew these round holes out of leaves. So if you ever see a leaf that looks like it's been hole punched, that's the leafcutter bee doing its work. And what it will do is it will take those little circles of leaves and it will bring it back to a tunnel that looks like this. And using those pieces of leaf, it will actually line the tunnel, and it would create little cells to lay its eggs. And then once those eggs hatch into larvae, they will be able to eat the pollen that has been placed into these cells. And we actually have a video of a leafcutter bee in action. And in this video, you can see it's already lined its tunnel with those pieces of leaves. And what it's doing now is it's getting all of that pollen off of its back legs, and it's filling up that tunnel so that it's ready to lay an egg in, and so that there will be food for that egg once it hatches into a larva. So with OEs, when we're creating these habitat structures for wildlife, it's important to make sure that we're actually helping the wildlife instead of harming it. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider, and there's amazing resources online to help you learn more about how to actually build these structures. If you've downloaded our worksheet, the link for a really great resource to learn how to build bee condos is on there. And I'll just mention a few things that you want to consider. So a space like this, if it's full of nesting bees, it can be a buffet for some insects who would kind of be predators towards these bees. So you want to make sure that either it's hanging or maybe it's attached to a hole that has Vaseline on it, and that way these insects can't get up and access those tunnels. The length of the tunnels and the design is actually really important as well. So how long the tunnel is and where these bees are in the tunnel kind of determines whether they will be born as a male or as a female. And so having a shorter tunnel can offset that ratio. So maybe there's more males than females. We want to have really nice long tunnels that are a specific length to make sure that we're helping out our bee populations. And above all, like what Raya was mentioning, providing native species is so important. So providing these native shrubs or wildflowers is really key to make sure that not only do they have nesting habitat, but they also have feeding habitat and areas to gather pollen from and to forage from. So bee condos are one way to provide this kind of direct habitat structure for wildlife. Another way is by building bird boxes or nest boxes. And in these photos, you can actually see this beautiful tree swallow who is using these nest boxes. And with nest boxes as well, it's really important that you're building it to the appropriate size and dimension and making sure that it's designed for the species that you're trying to attract. I know at Tommy Thompson Park, we have a lot of nest boxes that are used by tree swallows, so where Raya is right now. And Raya, I would love to hear from you. Do you have any other ideas of how we can kind of provide this direct habitat to some of our wildlife here in Toronto. So, Raya, I think you're on mute.
As I was speaking, I just realized I think I'm still on mute. Yes, Jasmine, I have ideas. Okay, I'm going to move the camera to show you. So in your own yard spaces, you can do things like, here I'm going to come right down to the ground, leaving leaves, leaving twigs, leaving these kinds of things on the ground rather than raking them away, because there are lots and lots of insects that actually overwinter underneath a leaf layer. Leaving dead stems is a really wonderful strategy as well. I don't know if you can see this tunnel here, but Jasmine just talked about leaves that need tunnels to nest in. And so these kinds of tunnels in the dead stems can be very helpful for that. Now, I live in an apartment building. I don't have a yard, or not an apartment building, but an apartment in a house. And so what I actually have on my windowsill, it's long enough, I have a little mini bee condo or mini bee house on my windowsill. And I can see, maybe you can see as well, there are a couple of holes where the bees have taken up residence. So right here, a little tiny, perhaps a sweat bee has decided to lay eggs in that tunnel, and there's one down here as well. So these are things I can do without really having that yard space.
Awesome. Yeah, so we've talked so much today about so many different ways to incorporate stewardship into your life and to kind of do these larger activities to help out our local environment. And now I'm thinking some viewers might be wondering, okay, planting a shrub is great, but that takes a lot of time and energy and resources. What are some ways that I can incorporate stewardship into my daily life and kind of into my kind of smaller everyday activities? So, Raya, I'd love to hear what your strategies are for doing that.
Yeah, so absolutely. There are a couple of things the City of Toronto has actually put out, a couple of documents and booklets that can help us get ideas. So I don't know if you know, the City of Toronto has a pollinator protection strategy. And in this booklet, there are ideas for what people can do to protect pollinators in their own spaces. We have a ravine strategy as well. And the links can go in the chat for these three different that I'm talking about, three different strategies. The biodiversity strategy, connected to that are these biodiversity booklets. So there's one about bees, there's one about birds, there's one about spiders, I believe even, and mammals and trees and shrubs. And in these booklets, there are also ideas for how you can help. So there are lots of ideas in these types of kind of documents that are already available, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, I mentioned earlier about adopting a kind of a mindset of being an environmental steward. But Jasmine, were there other ideas that you had that we can do like right away at home beginning today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a few ideas. And if anyone else has any ideas, I'd love to hear from you. So please put them in your classroom chat or put them in our YouTube chat. But I just want to share a few things that I do in my personal life that I find helps the environment and that I'm trying to change pieces of my lifestyle to help the environment. And it's not, no one's perfect. And it's all about, I think, making these kind of small adjustments. One thing that I'm really focusing on right now is consuming less. So just buying less things, whether that be less products with less packaging or even buying less clothing. That's something I'm really focusing on. And when I do need to buy clothing, what I'll do is I'll look for thrift stores or opportunities to share clothing with others. So thinking about how much energy it takes to create some of these materials and thinking about either reusing materials or maybe just not purchasing things that I don't need. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to grow my own vegetables. So this can be a great opportunity for anyone with a backyard space or even a balcony or even just a windowsill to feed yourself, get connected with the environment, and kind of prevent how much energy it takes to move some of these vegetables across the world to feed ourselves. And then finally, one of the most important things that I think we should all be doing is sharing our ideas and sharing our perspective with the folks around us. So we're doing that today. And I'd really encourage all of you to do that as well. To start bringing it up in conversations you have with your friends, your family, classmates, or teachers, and kind of sharing some of the amazing ideas that I'm sure you have for how we can perform environmental stewardship in our own daily lives.
So I understand that there have been a few questions that have maybe come in. We are going to take some time to answer the questions. If you do need to go at this point, then we want to thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you got some new ideas to inspire you. But Jasmine, is it time for questions now?
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for attending. If you do want to stick around for questions, we'll be doing that now. And our first question is from Bob, and Bob is asking, what impact has the pandemic had on nature?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I guess the short answer is we don't have concrete studies that can tell us for sure what the impact is. It's been only, well, it feels like a lot longer. It's only been a year and a bit. And for these kinds of answers that are really like scientifically based, we need a much longer study time. But in short, we have this impression that, well, yeah, there seems to be less air pollution because we don't have planes flying so much anymore, right? So that planes actually are a big contributor to air pollution and fuel consumption. So that seems to have created an impact. And Jasmine, do you have any thoughts on like wildlife impacts more directly?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, one thing that we're noticing, especially in some of our parks and our spaces here in Toronto, is that the pandemic has given folks a lot more time to get out and to connect with nature, which is really incredible. And we're seeing that need for having these outdoor spaces where folks can feel connected to nature. The problem with that, though, is sometimes when people get out, they don't necessarily know the best way to interact with the environment. So maybe they're going off trail, maybe they're feeding wildlife, or harming the environment in a few different ways. So while we really want people to be getting outside and interacting and feeling that connection with nature, it's really important that we know how to appreciate nature in a respectful way and make sure we're not harming any of the wildlife that share the space with us. We have another question here, and they're asking, is it illegal to go off trails in parks?
Good question. So yeah, I wouldn't say illegal is the right word. It's not like you're going to be thrown in jail, but when you look at park rules, if you're going to a park you've never been to before, it's always good to go to the website, like at Tommy Thompson Park. It's tommythompsonpark.ca, and check out the rules and guidelines. In this park, this is a really significant part for wildlife. And other parks in Toronto as well, they're really trying to encourage wildlife spaces. And by going off trail, we are actually disrespecting that wildlife because, without even realizing it, because it's called fragmenting habitat. So we are, rather than it being a continuous meadow, maybe we're causing a trail that separates one part of the meadow from another. And we might not think that's a big deal. For rabbits, sure, maybe it's not a big deal. But for smaller wildlife, it could very much be a big deal. And even for rabbits, if they're crossing that trail and they're not sheltered by the plants anymore, well, that means a hawk can come and get them because they can see them. So we're having impacts we don't even recognize are the case. So it might not be illegal exactly, but it is against certain park rules. And we really want to encourage people to enjoy the parks, enjoy them from the trails that have been set up for that enjoyment, but to also respect the space for the other organisms who spend time here and who live here, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it completely ties into, Raya, what you were talking about earlier about shifting mindsets. So maybe you're in a mindset where it's just habit for you to cut across trails and find the easiest way. When we start to think about the environment, think about how that's affecting the environment, we can shift our mindset and build kind of this habit of, even in urban spaces, going off the trail is just not the best thing to do. And once you get into that habit, then it'll be second nature. And you see someone else going off trail, you're like, what are you doing? That's not what we do. So it's about kind of thinking about the environment and these decisions and changing the way we look at these kind of what we might consider these small, inconsequential decisions. We have another question here, and this is about our bee condos that we were talking about. And they're wondering how many different types of bees will use those condos.
Oh my goodness. So in the world, there are about 20,000 different species of solitary bees that nest in tunnels, whether they're condos or maybe a tunnel in a plant stem or some other kind of tunnel space. And gosh, I can't remember the number for Toronto or Ontario, but there are certainly hundreds of different species that people they're not even aware of. Most people think all bees live in hives, right? I thought that until a few years ago. And then we find out, whoa, there's this whole other story behind bees. And there are a lot of different species that are native species to our ecosystems here. And live in those condos.
There are so many different types of species. I think I read a fact that there are 50 different species of bees in one Toronto backyard alone, which is incredible. And Raya mentioned those biodiversity resources before. So the biodiversity resource, the booklet that's all about bees, is incredible. Learning about all of these different species of bees that we have here in Toronto is just amazing. So I would encourage you all to definitely check that out. And you can find that PDF online, actually. So
yes, and I'm trying to quickly find in this booklet, and it's online as well, there's actually an official bee of Toronto. It says official on the website. Here it says unofficial, but the beautiful sweat bee here is Toronto's sort of official bee, which is kind of cool. They're super tiny. They don't really sting, right? These solitary bees.
Okay, it looks like we have one last question for today. That question is also about bees and all these different habitat structures. Wondering, what is the maintenance like for bee condos and nest boxes?
Yes, so for nest boxes, if in order for a nest to use it the next year, we do want to clear it out in between. So usually they have a special way to open the side door. They can be cleared out. That way we're not getting like organisms, tiny insects potentially, or mites that might harm the growing cycle of the birds. So clear them out. The birds want to rebuild a fresh nest with fresh material the next year. With the bee boxes, Jasmine, do you know about this one? I'm trying to remember what I've learned, because I've usually cleared out the ones that have an opening, but this one doesn't have an opening. And I can tell actually that there are some from previous years where I suppose once I know they're all out, I could go in and remove the debris with like a long tool. I just want to make sure that they're actually out of there. Do you have any further knowledge on that, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think that's right, Raya. I think when I was researching about bee condos, because I want to build my own potentially, I think what I read is that it's really important to do that maintenance and to make sure they're clean, because I think it's similar to what you were talking about with the nest boxes, where if you leave it with kind of previous debris in there, then other insects can get inside, and it may not be a healthy space for bees to live there.
We've got to get on this one and do some maintenance.
And a cool thing about bee condos as well is sometimes you don't just get bees, you can get wasps as well and other insects using that space. And if they're native insects, then that's great. These condos can provide habitat for so many different creatures.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have for today. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in with us this afternoon for our Environmental Stewardship live stream. And Raya, I don't know if you want to say anything to close us off here.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, if you want any links that we haven't posted, and so there are some on the worksheet as well, but you can put the question for the links in the comments, and we can do our best to give you some links for resources to learn more about what we've talked about. But thank you so much for joining, everybody, and for the wonderful questions. And keep exploring. Have a great day. Be good stewards.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.